Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. Chapter 3. The author diverts the emperor and his nobility of both sexes in a very uncommon manner. The diversion of the court of Lilliput described. The author hath his liberty and granted him upon certain conditions. My gentleness and good behavior had gained so far on the emperor and his court, and indeed upon the army and the people in general, that I began to conceive hopes of getting my liberty in a short time. I took all possible methods to cultivate this favorable disposition. The natives came by degrees to be less apprehensive of any danger to me. I would sometimes lie down and let 5 or 6 of them dance on my hand, and at last the boys and girls would venture to come and play hide and seek in my hair. I had now made a good progress in understanding and speaking their language. The emperor had a mind one day to entertain me with several of the country shows, wherein they exceeded all nations I have known, both for dexterity and magnificence. I was diverted with none so much that of rope dancers performed upon a slender white thread, extended about 2 foot and 12 inches from the ground, above which I shall desire liberty, with the reader's patience, to enlarge a little. This diversion is only practiced by those persons who are candidates for great employments in high favor at the court. They are trained in this art from their youth, and are not always of noble birth or liberal education. When a great office is vacant either by death or disgrace, which often happens, 5 or 6 of those candidates petition the emperor to entertain his majesty and the court with a dance on the rope. Whoever jumps the highest without falling succeeds the office. Very often the chief ministers themselves are commanded to shew their skill, and convince the emperor that they have not lost their faculty. Flimnap, the treasurer, is allowed to cut a caper on the straight rope, at least an inch higher than any other lord in the whole empire. I have seen him do the somerset several times together upon a trencher fixed on the rope, which is no thicker than a common pack-thread in England. My friend Redstraw, principal secretary for private affairs, is, in my opinion, if I am not partial, the second after the treasurer. The rest of the great officers are much upon the par. These diversions are often attended with fatal accidents, whereof great numbers are on the record. I myself have seen 2 or 3 candidates break a limb, but the danger is much greater when the ministers themselves are commanded to shew their dexterity. For by contending to excel themselves and their fellows, they strain so far that there is hardly one of them who hath not received a fall, and some of them 2 or 3. I was assured that the year or 2 before my arrival, Flimnap would have infallibly broke his neck, if one of the king's cushions that had accidentally lay on the ground had not weakened the force of his fall. There is likewise another diversion, which is only shewn before the emperor and the empress. The first minister, upon a particular occasion, the emperor lays on a table 3 fine silken threads of 6 inches long. One is blue, the other is red, and the third is green. These threads are proposed as prizes for those persons whom the emperor hath a mind to distinguish by a particular mark of his favor. The ceremony is performed in his majesty's great chamber of the state, where the candidates are to undergo a trial of dexterity very different from the former, in such as I have not observed the least resemblance of it in any other country of the old or new world. The emperor holds a stick in his hands, both ends parallel to the horizon, while the candidates advance one by one, sometimes leaping over the stick, sometimes creeping under it backwards and forward several times, according as the stick is advanced or depressed. Sometimes the emperor holds one end of the stick, and his first minister the other. Sometimes the minister has entirely to himself. Whoever performs his parts with most agility and holds out the longest in leaping and creeping is rewarded with the blue-colored silk. The red is given to the next, and the green is given to the third, which they all wear girt twice round the middle. And you see very great persons around this court who are not adorned with one of these girdles. The horses of the army and those of the royal stables, having daily led before me, were no longer shy, but would come up to my very feet without starting. The riders would leap them over my hand as I held it on the ground. And one of the emperor's huntsmen, another large courser, took my foot and shoe, and all, while it was indeed a prodigious leap. I had the very good fortune to divert the emperor one day after a very extraordinary manner. I had desired he would order several sticks of 2 foot high, and the thickness of an ordinary cane, to be brought to me, whereupon his majesty commanded the master of his woods to give directions accordingly. The next morning 6 woodmen arrived as many carriages, drawn by 8 horses to each. I took 9 of these sticks, and fixing them firmly in the ground in a quadrilateral figure, 2 foot and a half square, I took the other 4 sticks and tied them parallel at each corner, about 2 foot from the ground. Then I fastened my handkerchief to the 9 sticks that stood erect, and extended on all sides until it was tight as the top of a drum, and the 4 parallel sticks, rising about 5 inches higher than the handkerchief, served as ledges on each side. When I had finished my work, I desired the emperor to let a troop on his best horse, 24 in number, come and exercise upon this plain. His majesty approved of the proposal, and I took them up one by one in my hand, ready and mounted and armed, with the proper officers to exercise them. As soon as they got into order, they divided into 2 parties, performed mock skirmishes, discharged blunt arrows, and drew their swords, fled and pursued, attacked and retired, and in the short discovered the best military discipline I ever beheld. The parallel sticks secured them, and their horses falling over on the stage. The emperor was so much delighted that he ordered this entertainment to be repeated several days, and once was pleased to be lifted up the, and give the word of command, and with the great difficulty persuaded even the empress herself to let me hold her in her close chair, within 2 yards of the stage, from whence she was able to take a full view of the whole performance. It was my good fortune that no ill accident happened in these entertainments. Only one with a fiery horse belonged to one of the captains, pawing his hoof, struck a hole in my handkerchief, and his foot slipping, he overthrew his rider and himself, but I immediately relieved them both, and covering the hole with one hand, I set the troop down with the other, in the same manner that I took them up. The horse that fell was strained in the left shoulder, but the rider got no hurt. I repaired my handkerchief as well as I could. However, I would not trust to the strength of it any more in such dangerous enterprises. About 2 or 3 days before I was set at liberty, as I was entertaining the court with these kinds of feats, there arrived an express to inform his majesty that some of his subjects, riding near the place where I had first taken up, had been seen great black substances lying on the ground, very oddly shaped, extending its edges round as wide as his majesty's bedchamber, and rising up in the middle as high as a man. That was no living creature, as at this first apprehended, for it laid on the grass without motion, and some of them had walked around it several times, but that mounting upon each other's shoulders, they had gotten to the top, which was flat and even, but stepping upon it found was hollow within, and that they humbly conceived might be something belonging to the man mountain. And, if his majesty pleased, they would undertake to bring it with only 5 horses. I presently knew what they meant, and was glad at heart to receive this intelligence. It seemed upon my first reaching the shore, after our shipwreck, I was in such confusion that before I came to the place where I went to sleep, my hat had been fastened with a string to my head while I was rowing, and had stuck on all the time I was swimming. fell off and came to the land, the string, as I conjectured, breaking by some accident, which I had never observed. But though my hat had been lost at sea, I entreated his Imperial Majesty to give orders it might be brought to me as soon as possible. Describing to him the use and the nature of it, the next day the wagoners arrived with it, but not in a very good condition. They had bored 2 holes in the brim, within an inch and a half on the edge, and fastened 2 hooks in the holes. These hooks were tied by a long cord to a harness. Thus my hat was dragged along for above a half an English mile. But the ground is that the country extremely smooth and level. It received less damage than I expected. 2 days after this adventure, the emperor having orders that part of his army which quarters in about the metropolis to be in a readiness, took fancy of diverting himself in a very singular manner. He desired that I would stand like a colossus, with my legs as far as asunder as I conveniently could. Then he commanded his general, who was an old experienced leader and a great patron of mine, to draw up the troops in close order, and march them under me, the foot by 24 in abreast, and horse by 16, with drums beating and colors flying and picks advanced. This body consisted of 3,000 foot and 1,000 horse. His Majesty gave orders, upon the pain of death, that every soldier in his march should observe the strictest decency. With regard to my person, which, however, could not prevent some of the younger officers from turning their eyes as they passed under me, and to confess the truth, my breeches were at time in so ill a condition that they afforded some opportunities for laughter and admiration. I had sent so many memorials and petitions for my liberty, that his Majesty at length mentioned the matter first in the cabinet, and then in a full council, which it was opposed by none, except Skyresh Bolglum, who was pleased, without any provocation, to be my mortal enemy. But it was carried against him by the whole board, and confirmed by the emperor, that the minister was Galbate, or admiral of the realm, very much in his master's confidence, and a person very versed in affairs. But of a morose and a sour complexion, however, he was at length persuaded to comply, but prevailed that the articles and conditions upon which I should be set free into my I must swear should be drawn upon himself. These articles were brought to me by Skyrish Boglem in person, attended by 2 under-secretaries and several persons of distinction. After they were read, I demanded to swear the performance of them, the first in the manner of my own country, and afterwards in the method prescribed by their laws, which was to hold my right foot in my left hand, to place my middle finger on my right hand on the crown of my head, and my thumb on the tip of my right ear. But because the reader may perhaps be curious to have some idea of the style and manner of the expression peculiar to that people, as well as to know the articles which I recovered my liberty, I had made a translation of the whole instrument word for word, as near I was able, which I was here to offer to the public. Gulbasto Momrin Ivim Gurdilo Shifin Molmi Oli Gu. Most mighty Emperor of Lilliput, delight and terror of the universe, whose dominions extend 5,000 blue strokes, about 12 miles in some circumference, to the extremities of the globe. Monarch of all monarchs, taller than the sons of men, whose feet press down to the center, and whose heads strike against the sun. At those who not the princes of earth to shake their knees. Pleasant as spring, comfortable as the summer, fruitful as autumn, dreadful as winter. His most sublime majesties proposed to the Man Mountain, lately arrived to our celestial dominions, in the following articles, which by a solemn oath he shall be obliged to perform. First, the Man Mountain shall not depart from our dominions without license under our great seal. 2. He shall not presume to come into our metropolis without our express order, at which the inhabitants shall have 2 hours warning to keep within their doors. 3. The said Man Mountain shall confine his walks into our principal high roads, and not offer to walk or lie down in the middle of the corner field. 4. As he walks down the said roads, he shall take the utmost care not to trample upon the bodies of any of our loving subjects, their horses or carriages, or take any of our said subjects into our hands without their consent. 5th, if an express requires extraordinary dispatch, the man mountain shall be obliged to carry in his pocket the messenger in a horse a 6-day journey, once in every moon, and return the said messenger back, if so required, safe our imperial presence. 6th, he shall be our ally against our enemies in the island of Blesfiku, and do his utmost to destroy their fleet, which is now preparing to invade us. 7th, that the said the man mountain shall, at his times of leisure, be aiding and assisting our workmen, in helping raise certain great stones towards the covering of the wall of the principal park, and our royal buildings. That the said Man Mountain shall in 2 moons' time deliver an exact survey of the circumference of our dominions by a computation of his own paces around the coasts. Lastly, that upon his solemn oath to observe all above articles, the said Mountain shall have a daily allowance of meat, drink sufficient to support a 17 support of 1,724 to the power of 4 of our subjects, with free access to our royal person and other marks of our favor, given at our palace at Belafab Borak, the 12th day of the 91st moon of our reign. I swore this and subscribed to these articles with great cheerfulness and content, although some of them were not so honorable as I could have wished, which proceeded wholly from the malice of the Skyrish Bolglum, the High Admiral, whereupon my chains were immediately unlocked, and I was at full liberty. The Emperor himself in person did me the honor to be by the whole ceremony. I made my acknowledgments by prostrating myself at his Majesty's feet, but he commanded me to rise, after many gracious expressions, which, to avoid the censure of vanity, I shall not repeat. He added, that he hoped I should prove a useful servant, as well deserve all the favors he has already conferred upon me, or might do for the future. The reader may please to observe that in the last article for the recovery of my liberty, that the Emperor stipulates to allow me a quantity of meat and drink sufficient for the support of 1,724 Lilliputians. Sometime after, asking a friend at court how they came to fix on determining that number, he told me that His Majesty's mathematicians had taken the height of my body by the help of the quadrant, by finding it to exceed their proportion of 12 to 1. They included from the similarly bodies, and mine must contain at least 1,724 of theirs. Consequently, would require as much food as was necessary to support that number of Lilliputians, by which the reader may conceive an idea of ingenuity of that people, as well as the prudent and exact economy of so a great prince.